This week on your Old School RuneScape update, Araxxor combat achievements extend the depth of Old School combat. We briefly look at Last Man Standing, and Crystal Shard rates are buffed. Also a questing update on Penguins and Trolls, and Shane's breakthrough on Achievement Diaries. This is the Old School RuneScape update, episode 45, recorded Saturday, September 14th, 2024. Making friends with Achievement Diaries. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Old School RuneScape updates. Zero and myself are here, as we are most each and every week. And I know I say most each and every week because, you know, there could be a week that we just disappear. But if that to happen, we'll let you know why in advance.
Do you need to be worried now that you mention that?
I've been doing a lot of disappearing of things in game, and there's things that I just want to make disappearing of NPCs and mobs. But there's also aspects of the game that I want to make disappear. But more on that a little bit later in the podcast, I will say. But if you're joining us for the first time, full show notes over at update.show. We do have the community Discord over at update.show/Discord, and the friends chat in-game can be found at BitsBytes. So are you ready to sink your teeth into some combat achievements from the Spider and a couple of other changes this week?
Yeah, except for I still don't have the Slayer X level to do Araxxor. I'm so sorry to disappoint you for not gaining 25 Slayer. 2 weeks.
No, we knew that was going to be the thing when we started the show, and I just wanted to highlight mainly the fact that the Araxxor combat achievements are now here alongside a few other little changes to the boss this week, and I wanted to the reason I wanted to bring this up is the absolute absurdity of some of these combat achievements that were added this week for Araxxor. Would you happen to know that there is an Araxxor combat achievement that requires you to kill the boss without moving?
Yeah, no, I saw that. I'm not terribly surprised. I've seen some of the combat achievements of other bosses, and there's some pretty big stuff in there, and I think I like that, right? In a sense, especially Araxxor was never meant to be a particularly complex boss, and this just adds that extra layer on top.
Yeah, it adds it based on the combat achievements.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's really neat for one aspect of it, and the other thing I think when you look at it from this way is that there's mechanics in the boss that are specifically designed to have you move, in particular due to the venom that it throws and what have you. And if you can kill the boss without enabling that to happen, then you're off to a pretty good spot in your combat PvM adventures.
We talked about this before on the show. I believe that in old school, I feel the combat there's much more planning involved. Like you need to think ahead at the gear you bring, especially in terms of overcoming defense, dealing with special bonuses. Like for example, how one of the Moons of Peril, or two of them actually, they have a flat damage bonus, whereas one of them has a damage reduction. So you need to think about weapon speed in addition to some of the other stats of weapons. And these combat achievements, a really cool thing they do is they put a certain restriction on there, which means you can't just blindly copy over the gear from the strategy page on the wiki. You actually have to think about, okay, how am I going to achieve this particular thing? And you could imagine that for a loadout where you're not moving and you have to deal with a whole bunch of extra venom damage, you might choose a completely different approach to the boss than otherwise. So it's an interesting challenge, I think, for those who are interested in it, and it allows Jaggers to sort of stretch the context and avoid the thing where, especially bosses that are mechanically not super complicated, to avoid them immediately being quote unquote solved, right?
Or
Because
dead
that's what you want to
content
prevent.
if the
Well,
drops.
not necessarily dead content, right? Like, because people will keep doing it for drops or whatnot, or as part of Slayer task. It's more that if you just figure out how to deal with the mechanics and what equipment to wear once, it just becomes a chore to kill it, and this allows it to maintain that challenge and to have. Because I always find it really rewarding once I get in a flow for a boss, like not just my first kill, but getting to a point where I feel I get the boss, and I can,
Interesting. Okay.
right? If that makes sense,
Yeah,
because
it
that's the
does.
point where you want to get
It
to.
does. I
As,
get it because I've had that happen before.
especially for Slayer bosses, which you want to kill multiple of on a trip, right? So getting in a flow, this combat achievement basically is like, ha, that way you're doing the boss, it's not going to work for this combat achievement, and you have to kind of start over again.
Yeah, and and like you said, it's a good way of adding depth to the content that would otherwise, have a specific way of going in to kill it. Which
Yeah.
I think if you're looking at the old school combat system, you also have to extract that out to not only engaging with combat in the pressing of the buttons on the screen to do damage and prep work, but you also have to then extend that out to these things like the combat achievements to say, well, this is going to have an impact on it too. And then that's how you add depth to what is otherwise, on the surface at least, for people who want it to be a simple combat system. You can, of course, do other little bits and bobs along the way, but you wind up in a situation where the depth is added through these other things around the edges. And I can appreciate that people like that. And I think it would be very interesting to see what you get up to after you level up your combat stats a little bit more and start doing these PVM adventures, maybe, or even when Leagues happens, because I feel like we could have some interesting discussions on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not signing you up for that.
But yeah, I mean, I do hope that, like I said, I feel I've been doing like low, fairly straightforward PVM, but I think by the time Leagues comes around again, I should have some confidence to pick up some of the more interesting bosses as well. And I'm not gonna go straight into Desert Treasure 2 bosses or like high infiltration Tombs of Amascut,
or
but
sorry,
like
not Citadel, Colosseum.
Yeah, no, exactly. But like at least like some like low to medium invocation tombs, or like starting with the Chambers of Xeric, I would love to give that a shot. But we'll see by the time we get to Leagues.
Yeah, and a final note on this: the Araxxor combat achievements have a completion rate from 0.2% for the Grandmaster one, all the way to 2.6% for people who are sharing their achievement data with the wiki. A weekend. But there's also other Poll 82 changes that came this week, and the one I wanted to specifically talk about with that is that, well, first, the Perilous Moons items have been added to the Zerker bracket in Last Man Standing, and we saw the discussion that happened around that and whether or not they're going to have level 1 defense requirements on it. And I mean, we're not PvP people here, but I think it's an interesting thing to watch from the sidelines, I will say, on this, because it really does show what Jagex wants to happen, I think, with PvP. And this might be a controversial take, but I think if PvP were easier to get into without needing to go into the wilderness and use your existing gear and have a risk of losing it, I think we would be having an entirely different discussion about PvP in the game.
But isn't that what Last Man Standing is?
I know. That's why I'm specifically mentioning that, because I think it's a interesting thing to have in a petri dish off to the side that people can engage with if they want to. But at the same time, I also feel like the vast, vast majority of people who play old school don't engage with PvP at all, when maybe we should be taking a step into that world just to see what it's like. And seeing these changes this week on this poll had me thinking, well, maybe that might be interesting to try PvP a bit. But then I realized, oh, the vast majority of people in PvP have these optimized accounts with, specific combat levels set and whatnot based on what they've chosen to train, that I don't necessarily know if I can hop over that wall even to get into something like Last Man Standing. Hence why.
But Last Man Standing even overrides your stats, right?
It does?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Fair enough.
Yeah. You can choose between 3 different builds. Max Med, which is 99 in all combat stats except for 75 defense. Zerker, which is 75 attack, 50 defense, and the rest 99. And then 1 defense pure is all 99s except for 75 attack and 1 defense. So you just choose your build.
Why aren't we doing this then?
And upon arrival to the island, an account build is randomly chosen for all players, with a higher chance given to builds preferred by more players in the waiting area. So everybody is on the same build.
Why aren't we doing this then? Why isn't this?
You tell me. I have no interest in this.
Okay. So
but yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'm just the one that has the bloodthirst for killing people and doing PvP things in game.
No, like in theory, you should be able to go in here as a level 3 and get access to all of the stuff. From what I can tell, this is it's really interesting because for a long time, I think we talked about this before on the RS3 show when I was on, about how Guild Wars 2 has PvP. It's a quite successful scene, but in the PvP mode, everybody has the same stats, everybody has the same equipment, and this is exactly that. And I think, it looks interesting to me.
And my hunch on this is that you're going to run into, again, just like with our PVM discussion, you're going to run into the various things around the edges where there are people who are more experienced, who know how to use the combat system and everything, in the environment to succeed on that. But I guess this is a better step forward than just thrusting yourself into the wilderness and saying, hey, kid, have at it.
Mm-hmm.
So
the interesting thing is you can, for each of the 3 modes, you can basically set up your own preferred. So there's a default setup, but you can change the setup based on sort of different items. The only restriction is the number of food items you can get.
Yeah, and that's why it's interesting now that the Blood Moon items are available on the table.
Yeah, so people can choose that now as an option.
What am I wrong in imagining that when Jagex announced this that there was a bit of controversy for adding these in for people who were in Last Man Standing at level 1 defense, if I remember correctly? Or am I imagining that?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay, because that honestly sounds like something I think the community would say. But in any case, I wanted to highlight that that's a thing now, and it caught my eye. And maybe there's a world where, rather than doing what I'm doing now in old school, I do PvP related things. Maybe that'll be the thing, Sirion, that makes it so that I don't feel like I'm gouging my eyes out at times.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Last Man Standing is very much a battle royale game, so you can sort of get gear and weapon drops. You start with relatively low weapon drops. And then,
and I mean, working all the way up, we know how powerful the Blood Moon things are that drop. So All right.
Yeah, no, it like for me, I don't really like because
You don't
we
like
we
PvP.
talked about this before. I don't like the PvP aspect because I'm not a big fan of, having to deal with quick switches and quick thinking. I am
Yeah.
happy with like min-maxing the gear that I wear into a boss fight, but then when the boss fight arrives, I want it to be
You want to
relatively
know what you're
straightforward.
going to have to deal with.
Exactly. I wanna be, and like, to me PvP is too dynamic in a sense.
Yeah, and see, it's always interesting to me to watch because, coming from RS3, there is basically no PvP over there. There is the odd person who will snipe somebody in the wilderness. For our listeners who aren't familiar with RS3, in 2022 they made it so that you can turn PvP off in the wilderness. Dual arena's gone,
Yeah.
so it's basically gone and begging to be removed from the game. They just leave it for the three people who are interested in it, but completely opposite of what we have here on Old School in terms of having a thriving scene.
Oh, I love the maps though.
Yeah, yeah,
The Wild Varrock is just such a great interpretation of, Varrock.
yeah. They also buffed, and this is moving away from Pole 82 things this week. They also buffed the amount of crystal shards that come into game from a variety of sources around Prith, which
Yeah, that game is a surprise.
yeah, it is, and I figured that's probably something we should have talked about a bit and was on the radar. But I'm glad I remembered to pull this into the show this week because, and I know people don't do this in the main game, but I remember your discussion of crystal shards on leagues and training. What was it, smithing and crafting?
Yeah, I mean they didn't buff the pickpocketing rate, so it would
No,
not have made
it
any
wouldn't,
difference there.
but
Yeah.
these are mostly combat rates that we're looking at here that are buffed. Aside from the crystal acorn, which got doubled, it got doubled.
Yeah, I think my guess is that, to get crystal shards, people were pickpocketing before, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what people were doing. And I think this is mostly meant as a way to make a wider variety of activities feasible in terms of getting these crystal shards.
Yeah, like for example, they improved the rate by half on woodcutting and mining.
Yeah.
So that basically says all you need to do there on that one. Volcano, interestingly enough, and pickpocketing are both unchanged in terms of quantity and rate. So I would wager a guess then, based on that and what you just said, that you are right that the bulk majority of them came in through pickpocketing, but also probably Volcano.
Exactly. Like that the rates for those activities are probably where Jagex wants them to be, but the other ones are just not. So that's why we see this change, which personally I like. I'm really actually I'm getting close to starting with agility and prifdiness. So this came just in time for me to get me some extra crystal shards.
Yeah, and then you'll be able to make some divine potions along the way after you get them, right? Or would you put them into something else?
I don't know yet what I'll be using them for. I'm also conscious that if I want to make, like, I might be able to make some of the weapons out of it as well, or the crystal tools. I don't know what is tradable and what isn't in terms of like tool seeds and weapon seeds and all of that. I need to look that up.
The enhanced crystal weapon seeds are tradable.
Yeah, exactly.
152 mil, apparently, according to the GE.
Yeah, but the bow and blade, like how expensive are those?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
The GE pages on the website are giving me charged. Blade of Saildar, 148 mil, so you lose a bit.
Oh yeah, and the bow is 146. So yeah, you lose a little bit by okay, fair enough.
So it's just better to go for the seeds than from Gauntlet if you're looking for that sort of thing.
Yeah. Anyway, like the crystal shards, I don't know. It sounds like, yeah, making potions, to find potions out of them, making a bow.
I mean, if you're Iron Man, you're smiling with this.
Yeah.
There's that
Yeah,
at least.
exactly.
But um, I just think it's good to spread them around and get people doing more, like you said, rather than just pickpocketing and Volcano for that. So I don't think we knew these changes were coming. They weren't pulled for sure. We know that because, game integrity and all
I
that.
think, yeah, exactly.
And it was just a nice surprise to see this
Yeah.
week. And, many
That
people.
being said, by the way, you do need the crystal shards to charge the blade and the bow, and if you want to make a corrupted blade or corrupted bow,
Right.
you do need the crystals.
So there is a
shards as well.
persistent use for them then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and apparently even on the wiki there's a GP per shard calculator, and the best is the Bofa, followed by the Divine Super Combat Potion.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I was gonna say I realized this week felt like kind of a non-update week, but this might be the sleeper update of the week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we have been around the block a few times, and we should provide a bit of an update on questing and how that adventure is going in that regard. And, you realize that 2 weeks in a row here, we've had big topics to discuss on the show, from the Summer Summit to Araxxor. And we've done a few quests, a few that, really, don't warrant that much discussion. But there are a few that we do actually want to discuss as well. So I think we should just jump into the penguins right now here.
Yeah.
And see, I'm not even remembering the name of the other two quests we mentioned in pre-show. That's how forgettable they were. What was it? The Gate of Elidinus?
Spirits of the Elid
Spirits
and
of the
Between a Rock.
Spirits of the Elid in Between a Rock. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say about those, is there? Really?
No, not really. I remember Between the Rock being more annoying than I remembered. A lot of fetchy questy stuff.
And that's the thing with these old quests, is that they're very fetch friendly.
No, I don't think that necessarily has to do with the fact that there are also really good old quests out there. So I don't think that's necessarily.
No, I wasn't painting all the old quests that way. I was just saying those two in particular.
I suppose.
But we did the penguin quest, the first penguin quest, and I honestly could do an entire episode on penguins and the quest series if I wanted to, based on how they're going to land, but we're not going to, monopolize the time with that here today. But my initial takeaway on that is that, again, we were dealing with a very hilarious quest series when this one started out, and
not much of a serious in old school. That's the problem.
Yeah, I guess it's just Cold War, isn't it?
It is just Cold War.
But the interesting part about this is twofold for me. And we were on the topic of fetch quests before, and I remember saying at the end of this, gee, this is just another quest that's incarnated as a fetch quest at the end of Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I guess is okay for starting off the penguin. I keep calling it the penguin quest line because I know it exists elsewhere, but it doesn't exist here, so forgive me for that. But fetch quest aside, I think the interesting aspect just about this is how the penguins in this quest are, making fun of the USSR, I will say. And I think that's quintessentially RuneScape, and despite that fetch quest nature that I was highlighting, I still enjoyed this quest, I will say, myself. And
yeah, I think it's not a bad quest. I do now remember that they were Game Jam projects were talking about sort of follow-up quests with the puffins that would tie into this, but they were not pulled. So
no.
hopefully they will still come.
Yeah, we have to assume that means that they're not at the appropriate level of development for polling. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the game needs a series like this where it can just, take itself not seriously and
I mean, we have a
put
few of
something
those.
out
Aren't
there.
the Pirates? Isn't the Pirates series a bit like that as well?
I feel like Penguins takes it to a different level than Pirates. But maybe I need to play through the Pirates again and we can see how that lands.
Right.
But
Right.
I don't know. The Penguin quest is definitely needed for the other quest that we did in the series since we last spoke about questing here, making friends with my arm. And what was your interpretation of making friends with my arm? Did you have fun with that one?
I was a bit disappointed, to be honest.
Okay, that's interesting because that's opposite of me.
Yeah, there's this big build up, and I was like, oh, the rewards are really cool because there's some reward in like the
farming
space
patch
being used in the fire making reward.
That's
a
his
bunch
favorite
of
skill.
lore, a potential bit of lore around like the trolls, but all in all,
it was simple troll lore.
It felt like a repeat of the same humor of the previous quest. Like that didn't feel fresh or new that much. And then the stealth section, I don't
give
know,
you that on the rewards.
Was mostly just frustrating. So I don't know. Nothing about this quest stood out to me as this is a recent quest. Like it fell a bit flat for me. Like nothing too offensive about it. It's just meh.
And it was a 2018 quest compared to the modern old school quests and lore direction they've taken. So I suspect what happened here is that this was just the brainchild of who was on the dev team with this one? Mod Ash and Mod Monroe. There we go. Brainchild of Mod Ash, and just a follow up.
Yeah, but like
2018,
2018 also had Tale of the Righteous, which was one of the current quests. It also had Dragon Slayer 2.
Well, if you put it up against those two.
In 2017, we had Client of Corinth, Bone Voyage, The Queen of Thieves, and The Depth of Despair. Like all of those felt like more refined quests than this one. So
what happened here then? Because,
I don't know.
Because when you put it up against that, you're right. And maybe
Song
it was
of the Elves
just
was 2019. Song of the Elves was a year after this.
Maybe it was just a build up for me of. Because you remember when we started Old School, I said that this was one of the quests that I wanted to do for, the farming patch. And maybe it was just the build up for that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, not that herb prices are decent or anything today.
No, and look, I don't want to shit on this quest.
No, I don't think it deserves that.
No, exactly. But I don't know. No. It didn't do anything new. It didn't do anything special. I feel it's very much a let's just pick up what works and do it again.
Right, and should quests be built for that? I guess is the question.
I think they should always try to add something to the game.
Right. Okay, well, maybe from that perspective, you're right then. And I feel like I didn't have that big of a problem with the stealth, and maybe I'm giving it too much credit because A, I haven't done rat catchers yet, and B, it wasn't as bad as getting the goutweed.
I don't know. The goutweed I felt is very doable, and here I felt there was a lot of randomness involved. So I think the opposite on that.
Okay. And of course, the very top note of the trivia section. The title of this quest is an innuendo that is linked to an interview done by Maud Shawnee with Maud Ash about how this quest came to be. And I did actually click on that, and there was a discussion about how Maud Ash or Maud Monroe, I believe, just yelled up in the office one day when they were talking about this quest, and other people heard it. He just yelled randomly in the office, making friends with my arm.
Okay.
And it apparently it drew much laughter and raised eyeballs.
Yeah.
I can see your face right now. Would you care to tell the listeners what that looks like? No, folks, I can't see it, but I know what his face looks like right now.
Yeah, no, I think I'm good.
Okay. Come on, you can't just leave him hanging like that.
Oh, I'm just shaking my head.
Okay. Well, it has also been a week of training and XP gathering and whatnot for me this week. I somehow had the idea that it would be a smart move to go and revisit again Guardians of the Rift, and I went from 50 to 55 rune crafting. I do need to get 60 for a quest requirement still, so that'll come eventually. And I don't really have anything interesting to report there out of Guardians of the Rift. We've talked about that before. The minigame.
No spicy or toxic conversations or ridiculous Iron Man hate.
No Iron Man hate, but I live for the discussions and the memes. So even if I don't participate, I just smile at them. You know?
Could it be as good as the conversation that was going on at the GE when we did our questing, which was literally a debate on who is the best candidate for the US presidency in the upcoming election?
Yeah, and it's also going to be about the one who's going to provide the most death runes for Irons and what the pets are going to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to get to Slayer. Many folks will remember last week. When did we have we had Dan on last week, right? Or no, the week before.
No, 2 weeks ago.
We had Dan on 2 weeks before. Skater Dan Man. I had a bit of a conversation with him about Slayer, and he pointed me to a calculator on the wiki that, in effect, based on your level and your quest requirements and all that you've done, show what the chances are of each master assigning the various critters to kill for Slayer were, and I have decided that I am going to be using Konar. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing going forward, but I haven't had any problems as of yet, 3 or 4 tasks in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely mad for doing it. There's some Slayer monsters that are fine, but the spots are absolutely awful. At least you want to assign things in the wilderness, but I think the
freedom. Who does that?
To kill. There is Crystalia, I think.
Okay, yeah, we're not doing that.
But yeah, no, the nice thing about Slayer, for example, is like a lot of Slayer monsters, for example, you can find in the Catacombs of Corinth, which gives you Ancient Shard drops, which gives you Dark Totem drops, which, like, in general, is a good place to do Slayer. And
I'm not gonna lie, part of the reason I also went with Konar was the Brimstone keys as a chance.
It's always a good one to do, but yeah, like I don't know. I do Konar on my milestone tasks because the point rewards are great, but I'm largely interested in experience and being assigned. Let me try and find like a.
So are you on Neve then?
I'm using Neve. Yep. Yeah.
And what I've realized is that to make Slayer less painful, I need to do tasks using area of effect style attacks if possible. So that means I need to do them in multi-way combat, and I need to use a cannon, or I need to use ancients.
Which is an even better reason to not use Konar, because if you use Konar,
I think I just got lucky then.
Yeah, like, she might very well assign you locations that are not multi-way combat, and then you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
The whole point is, if you do Neve, sure, maybe the task list is not quite as nice, but almost every monster on there you can probably find in a multi-combat area. So,
like, one of the ones that wasn't nice was the ancient Zygomites.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, she gave those on Fossil Island.
Oh, I've not had that one yet.
Yeah. And the interesting bit about them is that they attack with either ranged or melee, but when the attack lands, it's a magic-based attack.
Right, so you want to be wearing, like...
Dragonhide.
Yeah, Dragonhide, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like Bloodfelts.
But the damage, of course, you can say, well, maybe instead what you'll do is you'll just pray ranged and use Guthans, and that's what I did, and I got through it. And there was only, 17 of them in the task, so it wasn't necessarily that bad, but it was definitely the most annoying one out of the bunch of Bronze Dragons, Calphites, and I'm forgetting what the other one was, in addition to the Ancient Zygomites, but there's that aspect of it. So, we'll see how it goes. And, this is very much my skill that would require me to claw my eyes out, or if I was inclined to, while playing, drug myself with something legal.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And the wacky tobacco is legal in Canada, right?
I am very, very, very sure it is.
Yeah. But I don't use that product.
I still
Slayer,
love,
if I had to do a Slayer competition where I had to get the amount of Slayer XP over a certain period of time, and I was really dead set on winning it, I would probably legitimately consider doing that.
Huh. Interesting.
That's how I feel about that skill.
Fun.
And what that has also encouraged me to do is to not visit the dispensary, but knock off a couple more task sets, achievement diaries for the XP that were there.
They're good for XP. There's a few interesting rewards in general in there that will help with Slayer.
Yeah, I did Corrent, easy and medium.
Wow, you finally got yourself a blessing to use.
Yeah.
Oh my god, you're so behind on that.
I know.
I thought you had at least on the easy one.
No. And I also realized that this is going to be good for when I do eventually go for the Xeric Talisman as well, because that improves the drop rate there.
Yeah, for sure.
And
didn't they put the disease-free patch behind
number 3, I think.
Oh, really?
I think it's hard.
Oh yeah. No, easy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. Okay, well that's an added side benefit.
Yeah.
But what
and access to the cooking range in Hosidian's kitchen, which is great for cooking training because you have an
which is weird because I feel like I've already used that, but maybe that was in leagues.
You did before probably max out Hosidia's favor.
That would be it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So they did put that there. That makes sense. And, people will know that task sets and achievement diaries are another piece of content in this game that I absolutely loathe.
Yeah.
And I figure one of the things that puts me in that camp of feeling that way and I think this is what I have learned this week from doing this one, is I've already talked about before how if I don't have the stats or the quest requirements to do a specific task set in one sitting, I feel like I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect of it. The other one is, and I came across this back when RS3 put out its most recent task set, is that if some of the tasks are, completely random for no reason that I would never do in the absolute game world, it's like, why would I do such a thing? I don't think I ran up into any of these in the core and diary sets here, so that was good. I think the one that felt the most arbitrary for me was delivering the intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the biggest revelation that came from this, and I think I can do the task sets after I have the requirements now if I do this, and that is putting the task down in what is going to be the most efficient route and the most efficient order to go from task to task.
Mm-hmm.
Because as it stands, if you look at the wiki task list, they're just listed numerically as they are in game, which isn't necessarily the way that you want to do them.
I think the quest guide, the plugin from Moonlight has.
Really?
Has a route in there, yeah.
Quest Helper?
Yeah.
Oh.
Quest Helper has the achievement diaries in there as well.
Okay, then that might be achievement diary solved. Then we will look back at this later on.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And folks, one thing that we don't necessarily do here is I don't necessarily on old school tell Siri on everything I'm doing, because I like to kind of surprise sometimes with these sorts of things. Like I didn't tell you that I did the task set this week, or that I had solved what was annoying me about them.
Uh-huh.
And you were concerned that we wouldn't have a show this week, but I knew from Penguins, the few patch notes, and this in particular, that we would land at an okay spot time-wise for this podcast this week. So I think I need to look into using Quest Helper now to lay out the path for some of the other achievement diaries that I can do. And we could be having a very interesting discussion come next week. Timing allowed, of course. So I'm going to kick it over to you now. Unless you have any more questions for me about my revelation this week.
No. I don't like. I have a very different way of doing my task sets, to be honest. I tend to knock out tasks here and there when I have some time and I don't know what to do. So usually for me, getting like to the end of it is just like one or two tasks left.
Right.
So that always feels worth it. So I just tend to knock them out here and there. But especially now that I have got all the quest requirements in terms of skills, they are sort of my guidelines for what skill to train next, right? So I got 75 smithing, for example, in the past few weeks because that gave me the Kandarin hard diary,
right?
Which is
a
diary I've wanted to finish for a long time. So I'm really happy to have finished that. I think the desert hard one was another one that also required, I think, also 75 smithing actually. So like, I tend to just do them here and there, and whenever I get close, that's a good reason for me to go and finish them.
And knock it out.
Yeah, like the big exceptions are the Western Provinces one, because I really can't be bothered doing jumping.
Yeah, no.
And then the wilderness, because I just don't want to go into the wilderness. I really don't, because like a lot of the wilderness tasks are like kill this, kill that, go there, and I just don't like having to take gear into the wilderness. But I will just knock a bunch of those out at some point.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think part of the reason I go at it from this angle is that back when I played ESO, there was a skill tree in the Elder Scrolls Online that was required for some of the end game raid stuff, and what it effectively did was turn your character, whether that be a sorcerer or dragon knight or what have you, any character, it basically added like a temporal timey element to it, it was basically like a temporal manipulation skill, basically is what it was. And to complete it, you had to basically run and move through all the game world zones and collect these book pages for it. And what that did is that was something that was just very, very painful to do, but ESO, like RuneLight, has a great plugin architecture associated with it. You could get a plugin that showed you the most efficient route to take for that. And that made that easier. You just throw on something on YouTube and off you pop. So I didn't necessarily think of tying those together, but that's how.
I like doing my own paths, right? Like, it's the same in leagues. I think this is the difference in experience we had with leagues. Like, I loved sort of calculating out the path, like, oh, this will get me just enough points to get this relic, which will make this task easier. Like, that whole thinking, love that, right? Like, and achievement diaries, it allows me to sort of stretch out the path. And this is like one of the things I have on my Iron Man right now, right? Like, oh, I can do this quest, get this quest reward, then it'll get me this task set reward, which will make this quest easier, and sort of trying to put it all together. In my Iron Man, I've gotten to a point where there's a circular dependency, so I need to make a decision at some point to just do it in a not optimal way. But yeah, I think it's a very different way of playing the game and enjoying the game. So I don't mind. Like, for some things, I will definitely go to the wiki, but for things like routes and task order and all of that, I will definitely try and figure those out myself. So that's why I don't mind the achievement diaries so much, because they are just like the individual tasks of the diaries are integrated in the way I play the game.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Honestly, that's also basically been my update. I finished a bunch of those tasks, but other than that, I have not had a lot of time. I've just been bumping up a few levels. I've been doing some Slayer. I've been doing some, like I said, 75 smithing. I'm probably gonna go around and try and get like base 75 is what I thought, because there's really only
That's huge.
Yeah, like there's Runecraft left.
How are you going to do that? Is that going to be Guardians of the Rift?
Undecided, but probably, and I'm not looking forward to it. But I need to get the full outfit, and I want to get the colossal pouch.
Yeah.
So I think Runecraft I need to do. Then there is thieving, but that's not too bad.
Varlamore.
With Varlamore,
yeah,
it's only 2 levels. Fletching, Slayer, woodcutting, fishing, cooking, mining.
There's only a few difficult ones in that list that you've mentioned.
Yeah, and it's also like there. Besides Runecraft, they're all at least 70. So it's only a few levels for most of these. So it's a nice little way of going around finishing these tasks. Like 75 thieving is needed for the Feminic Heart Diary as well, I think. So knock out a few like those. So that's probably what I'm doing. I should really get back to trying Zora as well. I just haven't had like the time to really sit down, play the game for a longer period of time, and dig into that.
Fair enough. But, and I think when you sum all this up together, you get to that picture that where these accounts are now, becoming not low level, not mid level, but they're entering that high level stuff where these sorts of things are going to take longer.
Definitely. I think I'm currently sitting in that.
I also want to say, and I'll let you continue right after this, is that I feel like the band when high level begins is lower in old school than it is in RS3. Like, I'll say high level probably in old school begins in the 80s.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think this has to do with the fact that, the power creep and just in general how easy it has become to become like high level. Like it almost feels sometimes that the high level that high level in RS3 doesn't start until you max because it's become so commonplace to max right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that which is kind of unfortunate, I think. But yeah, no, it's really the grinds are setting in, I feel, which I don't mind necessarily, but it's definitely turning from one game into another. The time between goals is definitely
Do you need to
it's
visit the
definitely
dispensary?
like no,
Because that's
it's not
legal
that
in your
bad.
country too.
It is legal in our country, yes. We call them don't call them dispensary though.
Oh, okay. What do you call them?
Um, Coffee shops.
Note to self: if I ever come visit, I will not say, "Let's go enjoy an afternoon at the coffee shop."
No, exactly. You can get coffee at basically every place, but not at coffee shops. Um, I am pretty sure that there is some historical context because the legality of this is a little bit funky. But yeah.
And on that note, it's good we don't have monetization on YouTube, because that would make this episode not eligible for monetization based on YouTube's very stringent quality standards.
Maybe they should smoke something to loosen up as well.
They definitely need to. They definitely need to. But that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Old School RuneScape Update. Hopefully everybody enjoyed themselves on what was very traditionally the Old School RuneScape Update this week in terms of content and what we've been doing. We'll be back next week for another one. It's going to be interesting because there is no update. There's no update prior to Varlamore week, so we'll have to find something to do to entertain ourselves. But anything before we go? Anything you'd like to pass on to the listeners? Any grand thoughts, visions?
Nope.
Alrighty then. Well, sounds good. If you do want OSRS update delivered automatically to you, the best way to do that is to subscribe. Update.show/OS. We're on all the big podcast listening services out there. Apple, Pocket Cast, Spotify, and more. Just visit update.show/OS and click on your favorite one. And we're also on YouTube as well, at youtube.com/OSRS update. And with that being said, we'll see you guys next week for another episode of the Old School RuneScape Update. See you then, everyone. Take care.
Bye bye.